This week, Paul and I interview Brent Dukes, Director of Information Security with a publicly traded manufacturing company. In the news, malicious JavaScript can snoop on sibling browser tabs, Drupal and WordPress are having a bad time, and the US Postal Service takes over a year to fix an API vulnerability. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies. Protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week, Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 41, our 42nd episode of Application Security Weekly. I am, of course, your host, Keith Hoodlet, and I'm excited to be joined once again by my illustrious co-host, Paul Asadorian.
It's good to be here and illustrious, I think.
Every week, sure. Paul. I think I've done it. I've changed it up a few times. You're always, to me, Paul, you're just going to be illustrious.
Thanks so much, Keith. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much for being here, of course, Paul. And a quick announcement before we get into the interview today. Join us for our webcast with Chronicle entitled Intelligence-Powered Malware Hunting. This webcast will be held December 5th at 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Go to securityweekly.com/chronicle. That's CHRONICLE to register now. You're not going to want to miss this one. So with that, apart from being friends, and of course a friend that I look up to, Brent Dukes is both a hacker and director of information security for a Fortune 2000 manufacturing company. His background is in software and systems engineering in radio protocols and IoT products, which gives him a diverse background for making and breaking many different types of systems, of which he's trained a little bit about at B-Sides Boston in the past. Brent has, of course, spoken on various topics at security and hacker conferences as well, such as DEF CON, B-Sides Boston, as I mentioned previously, Boston Application Security Conference, and others. His hacking interests range from binary and hardware reverse engineering to web applications and CTFs. Brent Dukes, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Keith, and thank you, Paul, for having me. This is pretty exciting for me.
Nice to have you here, Brent. I finally got your name right.
You got my name right this time, yes.
Every so often that happens with someone, I just can never remember their name. And yeah. I just ended up sometimes calling them by the name that I chose for them, but I think we're good. I've successfully converted to Brent, so we're good.
I think you got it right. Last time I saw both of you, actually, was in Kentucky at DerbyCon.
Oh, yeah.
You were both speaking, and I was not speaking. I'm the only person on the show that wasn't speaking at DerbyCon, unfortunately. But I remember seeing both of you there. You both spoke and did a good job. So
thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it very much. So, Brent, I want to talk a little bit about your recent Boston Application Security Conference talk, which I thought was pretty cool. Didn't get a chance to make it to the talk myself because I was actually traveling at the time. But first of all, is it out on GitHub? What is it called? If it's not out on GitHub, what does it do? And why'd you build it?
Right. So the tool is called MS Evader. It stands for Mod Security Evader. I have not actually uploaded the code to GitHub yet. What happened was I developed this probably in the spring, over in summertime, and Burp Suite came out with Burp Suite version 2, and I haven't tested it as an extension to Burp Suite 2 yet, so I'm waiting to get that testing in. I've been traveling a ton, but it will be uploaded. It's open source. I will upload it probably within the next couple weeks, and you can all play with it. So you want me to tell you about the background of the tool and what it does?
Yeah.
Well, so
awesome.
I guess maybe even a little bit more background from the tool itself is, what is mod security? I know what it is,
Right.
but for our listeners that maybe don't know or don't have experience in it, what is it and what is that tool supposed to do? Because clearly this is an evasion to mod security.
Right. So mod security is an open source web application firewall. So it's meant if you have a website or a web application, it's meant for you to stand it up in front of your server, kind of as a reverse proxy, and protect you from things such as SQL injection, from cross-site scripting, all of the things that hackers are doing to your site that you might not want them to be doing. So it's open source, and there's an open source rule set for it, put out by OWASP actually. It's called the OWASP CRS, the core rule set. So the idea behind this was to figure out ways to evade the web application firewall. Clearly, I'm not the first person to try to evade WAFs. There's tons of research in this, right? Going back at least a decade, if not 15, 20 years. But you know, kind of the backstory of this tool is how it came to be. And the backstory kind of has a lot to do with application security. So I'm thinking you probably want me to kind of start telling you the story of how this came to be. Is that where we're going with this?
Yes, tell stories, Brent.
Tell us a story. MS Evader is much more surgical. It's not really a blunt instrument per se. This is the sort of tool that you built to be surgically able to evade the rule set, unless of course maybe the rule set isn't that great. But yeah, tell the backstory. Like why go and build something like this?
Right. Yeah. So it is actually kind of a surgical tool and not like a brute force tool. Kind of the backstory is I was demoing a web application and I was kind of like testing out the site before I deployed it. It was a site that could take credit card numbers, could take bank account information, and people could make payments and things like that. So I was just, in the first 10 minutes of demoing the site, I logged on as admin, and I noticed that I could see the masked password of all of the users that were underneath my account when you went to go change their password as admin. So by, of course, asking your browser very nicely, hey, what's the value in that masked field on the page, it would spit out in plain text what other people's passwords were. Right? So that's like a red flag to me in application security for two reasons. I'm hoping one of you is going to chime in and tell me the first one and then give me the second one as well. Here's the pop quiz, right?
Oh, God, I wasn't prepared for this. Hold on. Ask the question.
If you're able to get passwords themselves that are just being masked, either they're being P64 encoded and not encrypted, or they're just not transmitting any of that stuff in an encrypted protocol. But my guess is it's probably that they're encoding, not encrypting.
Right. So you kind of jumped ahead to the second problem. But the first problem is I shouldn't be able...
They've ignored security completely in the application would be my first hypothesis.
Okay. Well, we'll get there. We'll get there, right? So, yeah, the first problem is you shouldn't be able to access anybody's password, even if you're an administrator, because, you know, people could be reusing these passwords on other sites. And just because I'm the admin of this site doesn't mean I should be able to access everybody's password and then go try it on Gmail or Yahoo or anything like that. And then, of course, the second problem is if you can show what the password is, that means you're storing it in some reversible mechanism in your database, which is like the first tenet of how you store passwords in a database is, you know, salt and hash, some completely irreversible algorithm that's not going to be discovered by anybody. So this kind of set off a red flag, and I contacted them, and I said, hey, you know, I noticed as I was checking out the site that I could see people's passwords. I think, first of all, this is wrong because A, I shouldn't be able to see passwords, B, because you're storing them incorrectly, and here's why, and here's how this all works. And I really tried to explain it out in detail about what they should be doing. So they came back in about 2 weeks, and they said, hey, Brent, good news. We stopped sending all of the passwords to the client application. Okay, I'm looking for faces of horror, but I haven't seen any yet.
Okay, great. So you stopped sending to the client application, but did you start storing this securely?
Exactly. That's exactly the point, right? So their response was a little nerve-wracking to me. So I said, hey, do you guys mind if I do like a couple-hour mini pen test? And I wasn't expecting them to say yes, but they did, right? So I said, okay, I'll give you a little pen test. Their CEO signed off on it and everything. So I just spent one night, like 3 or 4 hours, and I found, you know, OWASP Top 10 was kind of a checklist. You know, you've got SQL injection, you've got cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, remote code execution through unrestricted file upload.
You're confirming my original hypothesis, Brent.
Yes, we're going back to Paul's point here. The security wasn't really part of this application, right? So I started writing a pen test report, as a good pen tester does, and I'm getting very detailed screenshots explaining the methodology and why this is wrong. I'm trying to be nice about it. And I realized, oh, I'm missing a few screenshots. So a couple nights later, I said, oh, I'll just break into the site again, and I'll grab the screenshots, and my report will be complete, and I can send it to them, and this is going to be great. So I go to break into the site again a few nights later, and all of a sudden I'm blocked by Web Application Firewall. That wasn't there a few nights ago. Okay, interesting, right? So contact them and say, hey, do you think you could whitelist me on the WAF because I was in the middle of a pen test and now you've got this WAF up and my exploits aren't working anymore. And they come back and say, well, we're unhackable now because we have a WAF, right?
They talked to Not Kevin. They were like, Not Kevin, what do we do? And he's like, you need a WAF.
Right, exactly, yeah. I mean, no, it's a great first step. I'm not putting down web application firewalls by any means. It's a great first line of defense against a lot of exploits. Right.
You're being so kind, Brent.
Well, it's true.
It depends on how they're implemented. But
exactly, and that's where we're going with this. Okay, so now they've kind of said, well, we're unhackable, right? And as a hacker, that's a challenge to me. It's like, oh, can you break into our site now? And it's like, okay, I can. I'm going to. So I spent a lot of time researching the specific provider of web application firewall that they had chosen. In fact, signing up for an account myself, setting up my own domain, and starting to like play around with different ways I could get around it. And I realized that this wasn't going to be easy. So I had to research specifically how to figure out or reverse engineer the rule set that they were using in their firewall, and then create my own tool to help me create evasions that would tell me if it was going to pass or fail before I sent the traffic to their server. Because you can get your IP address gets blocked for a limited amount of time if you send something malicious, like an obvious SQL injection or an obvious web shell or something like that, right? So they block you. You can't access it for 5 days. So okay, I want to know before I even send that traffic to them if this is going to get blocked. So so I created this tool as an extension to Burp Suite, which is kind of my favorite web pen testing tool, or where I do all my work when I'm doing a web pen test. And so it's built in. So as you create, if you're familiar with Burp Suite, there's a lot of different places where you can kind of craft your own payloads or posts or get commands to the server. So it's kind of built into that, and it shows you on the side, well, how is your score going to be rated within mod security? And can you figure, if you've reverse engineered what the scoring is on the specific provider, is this going to pass or fail? Are you going to get blocked right away, or are you going to pass? And if you're going to get blocked, it highlights for you, kind of like if you're familiar with like regex, done regex before, Keith?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Regex101.com is my go-to. It's a free site that I always test all my regex with.
And I had always wondered, like, I knew the limitations of a WAF. And then it was explained to me that it's just like regex in front of all of your web traffic. And then I understood at a much better level my struggles with WAF implementation.
That's most of the rules. There are some exceptions to it.
Sure.
There's wordless. There's with mod security, you can create a rule. If you've ever heard of lib injection, which is a specific library meant to detect cross-site scripting, you can actually call out to lib injection for mod security by creating a custom rule. And it will come back and say, oh, this looks like cross-site scripting to me. So it's not just regex and it's not just wordless. There's a whole combination of different types of rules. But the reason I'm mentioning regex, there's a website called regex. I think it's regexr.com.
Now, see, is it regex or is it regex?
I call it regex.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I might intermix the two. I don't know. Keith, do you want to weigh in on this?
I'm a regex guy. I think that's pretty much where I go. It's, needless to say, most regex-based WAFs are old and antiquated, but sadly, that's what also most of them are.
But it is short for regular expression.
It's short for, but it's like GIF and GIF.
Regex, I don't know. Anyway, someone will call us out for... actually, more than one person's going to feel very strongly about this, and we're going to hear from them.
Well, I'm calling it regex. All right?
Regex.
So
go with regex.
You can blame me. All the hate mail can go to me.
Regex.
Yeah.
See, my thought is it's regular expression, so it should be regex.
Okay. I mean, you're probably a GIF guy, and I'm a GIF guy. Is that?
I don't know. I'd have to think about what I say. What do I say?
We're gonna get email on this, Paul.
It's Giphy, so it's a GIF, I guess. I call it Giphy is the Slack channel thing. Right. That's my argument there.
Right. So
anyway, sorry. Continue.
We're getting way off topic here, right? So there's a website called regexr.com. And it basically allows you to paste a huge blob of text, and then you can create regex rules. And it highlights for you specific areas of the text you pasted that matches the regex, right?
Super helpful.
So that's exactly how I built my tool. It's like, wouldn't it be cool if it highlighted for you the areas of your payload that are going to violate the WAF rules, and then tells you which rule it's violating, so you can go look it up if you want to, or even shows you what that regex rule is, so you can try to figure out a way around it. Or, and in addition to that, rather, it shows you how it contributes to the score, because the way mod security works is each rule violation adds points, and there's different categories for these points. You have a general category, you have a SQL injection category, you have a cross-site scripting category, and that's just what's included in the core rule set. If you're creating your own rules, you can create more categories and have your own scores. And then you set thresholds for each category. You say, okay, if cross-site scripting score is greater than 15, block the traffic. If SQL injection score is greater than 5, block the traffic. So you can see how individual portions of your payload contribute towards that score. And you can try to find the portions of your payload that you can tweak in order to get around those rules. And you can do all of this before you send a single packet to the server. And that's what the tool is. Did I explain that clearly? Do you guys get that?
So do you need, sorry Keith, do you need a score of 0 to pass?
You do not. There's threshold values, and actually
by default. So you're talking about the default rule set.
Yes.
I see. So your tool tells you if I'm under the threshold or above the threshold for my traffic being blocked.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like for example, in the SQL injection score, if your payload or if your get or post request to server contains the word select, that's worth 1 point. But there's a million different
ways.
total valid ways that have the word select. Like you could just have a string that says, oh, I was walking down the street and I selected a rose. Well, that doesn't make any sense, but you know what I mean. Like the word select is a very common word. It's not just going to be malicious.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So the word select counts for 1 point. But then if you have the word union, that's another point.
Yes.
And if you have, users or passwords or credit card or like something, they all contribute.
Our users will select the right union with that. That goes over the threshold. It's just an English sentence. I get your point. Yeah.
You get my point, right? So
you include an apostrophe and it adds an extra one if you did like
or if there's like 4 characters in a row that are not like a letter or something, or a letter or a number. Like if you have a quote, a colon, a white space, and
again, it's regex in
exactly right. So the core rule set is. I don't know if it's like a couple hundred, 300 or 400 different rules, and there's different versions of the core rule set. And the interesting thing I found when reversing this provider was they're actually using an old version of the core rule set. So I had to figure that out, go back and download that version of the rule set and start working on that. But you can also try to figure out evasions for the new version of the core rule set, or you may have a situation where the WAF provider has their own rules in addition to the core rule set. And you need to figure out what those rules are and import those.
Back in the day, we did I'm talking years ago, an interview with TrustWave. There was some of the maintainers from Mod Security, they had their own rule set at TrustWave. I don't know if that's still
correct.
true.
Yeah, you can actually pay. TrustWave has an additional rule set for, it's like an add-on for the core rule set. And I think you pay $500 or $600 a year. So I don't know if you do not quote me on this figure. I looked into it.
It could have changed, yeah.
I researched this because I was researching everything mod security when I was working, like a good hacker does. You research everything.
Right.
I was looking at the source code for mod security for nights. But yeah, you pay extra and you get an extra set of rules that may or may not be related to specific things like WordPress or Drupal or Joomla. But they could also be targeted towards SQL injection that the core rule set missed. I mean, I don't know what's in there because I don't have a license for that myself.
Gotcha.
But that's available as well. So anyways, this all wraps around, and we're talking about mod security. And what I found doing a little bit of research was not only does this is a major cloud provider of security stuff, and all they're really doing is reselling you open source mod security, open source core rule set, and a few extra rules that they've created. But they're not the only vendor that does this. There's about all the WAF providers on the market, like 1/3 of them do that. 1/3 of them have their own WAF rule engine that processes the core rule set.
Oh, interesting. So they use the mod security rules, but they don't use mod security to implement them.
And I should credit some of that research. I think his name is Christian Christian Fiore or Christian something. I'm butchering his name now. I apologize if he ever sees this. He's the maintainer of the core rule set for mod security.
Okay.
He actually did the research and found about 2/3 of these providers are really just reselling you the core rule set. There's 1/3 that are doing new stuff, and that's great. So there's that. Like, this tool doesn't just work against this one provider. It's actually a great tool to create evasions for
really any WAF, right?
Any
it doesn't
WAF.
have to be mod security.
Right. So part of the tool that I didn't even talk about was reverse engineering or figuring out the scoring mechanism in the rules. Because, you know, just because mod security suggests your threshold value should be X, Y, and Z, this provider could have changed those numbers because they've detected something else.
So in that sense, it is specific to mod security-like rules that have a scoring system.
Exactly. It's specific to that. But the tool actually has a mechanism, what I call it fingerprinting, where it will take the rules that you've imported and say, oh, this rule's worth 1 point, this rule's worth 1 point. If I sum them, they're 2 points. So let me test a payload against that server. Okay, 1 point passes, 2 point passes, 3 point passes. Kind of fuzz the server until you get to that threshold for a specific category.
But you have to have their rules to do this.
You need to know what the rules are.
I got you.
Yes. Okay. So now you figured out what the threshold is in one category. You can iterate through the categories and figure out where the thresholds are, and then save that as a profile.
So, Paul, what you do, and this is the traditional way that bug bounty hunters do this, is you sign up for a DigitalOcean account, and then you effectively profile the page until that IP address gets blocked or blacklisted, and then you just switch to a new one. Like, literally, that's how you do it. I mean, you do that in Amazon, and if you're coming from Amazon, by the way, from what I've heard, and I haven't done this myself, but if you're doing this sort of thing from an Amazon EC2 instance, you never get blacklisted because Amazon's pretty much whitelisted everywhere.
Yep, I've heard that too, Keith. Yep. Interesting. So you spent a lot of time on this.
I did, yeah. So this was a big project.
You went down a rat hole. Because we come back, this was for one free mini pen test, Brent.
Right. Yeah. Well, see, that's what happens. So when you, because I consider myself, so I am in information security career-wise, but I consider myself a hacker. Like, I've been doing this since the mid '90s, right? So when you tell a hacker that something's unhackable, it's like a social engineering.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Yeah,
it's like social engineering a hacker. How do you social engineer a hacker? You tell him something's unhackable, and like, or her, him or her.
They'll spend all their time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, oh well, I have to do this now. Like, you know what happened to BitFi, the cryptocurrency wallet over the summer, right? John McAfee says, oh,
he did came
this
out.
This is unhackable cryptocurrency wallet.
Free pen test for all, right?
Yeah, basically. It's actually a smart business move. Okay,
McAfee's no dummy, man. He's a smart dude. People underestimate him because he's outlandish, but he's a smart dude.
So you want a free pen test? You tell people you're unhackable, and the problem is if you get the wrong person. Right, so I'm a nice guy, so I'm trying to present a report and say, hey, here's all your problems, and I can't work with you until you've resolved this. But you get the wrong person doing that.
Now, continue your story. How long did you spend writing this tool?
Well,
how much time passed by until they told you it was unhackable until you then brought it back and were able to buy it? I'm assuming.
So to be honest with you, the first version of the tool, it was like command line. Like, I threw it together basically
just for this test.
Like piping together a bunch of already available like bash commands. Right. So I threw that together in like 2 nights. But then I said, well, wouldn't it be cool if this was built into Burp Suite? Right. So that's when I really built the tool. But, you know, over the course of 2 nights, I kind of built like the prototype.
The profiler.
Okay, let me figure out how this works. Okay, now I've written, I was able to, so for this provider, with the core rule set, with their own rules in addition, it took me about 15 minutes to create an evasion for SQL injection. About 15 minutes to write an evasion for cross-site scripting. And I spent about 3 hours, and I wrote an evasion for uploading my own web shell. So, you know, that's not a lot of time to create those kind of evasion. Like, when you think today, creating a new WAF evasion, there's so many out there. And if you try them all and they don't work, you could spend nights, weeks, months trying to figure out a new way. And, like, you just don't even know what direction to go in without any kind of feedback.
In today's world, the application could have changed in that time frame several versions over, depending.
Absolutely.
Likely not in the app you were testing, right? But in other DevOps processes, right? As time goes by, the app changes.
Yeah, so it's like you need something. You got to figure out an evasion quicker. And this was an awesome tool that helped me create evasions really, really fast, which I don't think I've ever seen. You know, I attend a lot of conferences just like you do. I go to a lot of talks. If I see WAF evasion, if I see SQL injection, cross-site scripting, I'm probably going to that talk, right? Because I love offensive security. I love figuring out new ways to break stuff. And I've never seen anybody do something like this, so I thought it was really cool. You know, maybe somebody's going to write in and say, well, I already had that tool last year. That's awesome. You know, I'd love to see it and compare it. And
no, it's cool.
But yeah.
I, for one, can't wait to see it in Burp Suite Pro. That's going to be pretty awesome. And then, two, I can't wait to see it, like, especially if it gets out on GitHub. We'll put it in our learning and tools, you know, segment for that as well, and then refer people back to the interview. Because I think that, you know, it's both sad and scary how many companies say, hey, we've got a WAF in front of this, we're protected. And as you pointed out, this was a large content delivery, you know, DDoS protection type company that's providing this effectively as something that you can go out and buy and test as an individual, right? And so it's just like, yeah, it's not worth the money that you're probably paying for it. And by the way, you can probably set mod security up yourself if you really wanted to. And maybe even, you know, people would go and test this against their own applications and say, hey, by the way, we're paying way too much for this service. We can actually go get something better. Like, I don't know, maybe Signal Sciences, for example, or other tools that are out there. But that would be the one that I would suggest. So,
yeah, you know, it's interesting you say you could set up mod security yourself, because especially I was reading over the news segment. As we get into the news stuff, this may be a recurring theme that comes back. But there's definitely like pluses and minuses, or pros and cons to taking the time to set stuff up yourself versus paying someone to offer it, like software as a service or as a cloud service, right? Because you got to worry about patching, you got to worry about maintaining this and monitoring, and that's all an expense, right? So if you can pay somebody else to do it or hook your tools into it, there's definitely some pluses and minuses there, and it's something you really have to evaluate for yourself. I wouldn't recommend that anybody who's going to set up a website sets up mod security themselves. Like,
I agree, and for these reasons, when you first start on this endeavor, we'll use mod security as an example, right? You're piecing together open source components, right? Like, it's not just mod security that has to be tied to Apache. You have to customize your Apache config, build it in, and now, so when you get into multiple open source components, what if you need to implement another Apache module or upgrade Apache and it's not compatible? So you get that. But then the second thing you're going to want to do is, well, I need a way to report on this. Right?
Right, exactly. So monitoring, reporting.
You either go get something off the shelf, like I used to do back in the day, like for Snort, for example, I'll get someone else's interface, but that requires a different version of, you know, mod security that's not compatible with your version of Apache. And then, so once you get all that working, then it's something fails and there's a security vulnerability, you got to upgrade another component and start all over again. I talk about similar situations in a talk I gave about open source security software in the enterprise, right? And that's the, at least in my experience, as the project grows, you run into some of those headaches. If you've got one small site and you're just protecting that site and it's just you, awesome, go for it, right? But then when you have those problems I mentioned, plus now you've got a team of operations people, a team of developers that may also need access to that. Well, now it's even harder to take something off the shelf and meet everyone's requirements. Right,
and to make matters even more complicated, you know, you're mentioning Apache probably because you hear mod, and you know, mod, everything is for Apache. Mod security can also be plugged into Nginx.
I was going to say, that was my question for you, was for Nginx.
Yeah, so actually, my friend Max mentioned to me the other day, he's like, hey, you know what's funny is, like, people set up a website with Nginx to make it more performant and more scalable and handle more users. But if you set up mod security in front of it with Apache, that's just going to slow everything down. I said, well, Nginx also works, or mod security also works with Nginx.
With Nginx, yeah.
And I believe a few other web servers as well. So that even adds more confusion, because what if you upgrade Nginx and it's not compatible? It's a whole ball of wax and going down the rabbit hole of stuff that you don't want to patch.
It is easier today with package management to deal with that in modern Linux operating systems. It reminds me of the day when I worked at the university, and it was a Solaris environment that we were supporting, and we built Apache from source to deploy it out to all of our web servers. So you had to deal with upgrading Apache was upgrading all of your dependencies, testing it, making sure all those modules fit together, making sure that module needed a library, that it was available before you deployed it out.
Right.
So I encourage that if you're going to get into Linux or Unix administration or security, is to do some of that stuff yourselves. Even though we may not have to go down that path today, it's a huge learning experience for me. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for me, talking about learning experiences, and now I'm going to get really off track here, but you know, I've been a Linux user probably since like 98, 99. but I didn't really understand Linux until I started using Gentoo.
Yeah.
Because Gentoo requires you to bootstrap it and install everything yourself from scratch, right? And I used Gentoo from 2002 to 2012. 10 years I was a avid Gentoo user. I learned so much about Linux just in that first month of operating it than I did in the years before using like Red Hat and Caldera.
These
Slackware.
kids today have it easy with these Linux distributions, right, Brent? Listen to those old crotchety Linux, Unix people going, back in my day, I had to build and compile everything from scratch. And if you want a new kernel module, you had to build the whole kernel.
You got to have a binary version of GCC to compile the new version of GCC just so you can bootstrap your system and compile all the other components. I mean, Gentoo, But now we're going way down the rabbit hole. I'm sorry, Keith.
Yeah, sorry.
No,
Keith,
actually,
you're still there.
This is a perfect segue into my 5 questions. The first of which is, what were the specs like on your first computer? So, hey, keep going.
Okay, so first computer meaning the first computer in my house or the first computer that was mine personally, or both?
Both. Why not? Both.
Okay, so first computer in my household was an Apple IIe. Had the dual disk drive that sat on top of the keyboard.
Me too, dude.
Yeah,
same one.
And the green monochrome display.
It was a different physical system, but same model.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I still know the serial number of it because I memorized it and it was my password. Yeah. So I memorized the serial number of our Apple IIe, both the monitor and not the CPU, but the base keyboard that had like all the components inside, right? And that was when I combined them together. That was my password for some things originally. So anyways, I had the green monochrome display. That's where I learned basic programming. Originally, when I was in like 5th grade, I don't know if I booted it without the floppy disk or we had like a ProDOS floppy disk.
There was a boot disk. There was an initial boot disk that I think you had to put in to initially boot the operating system.
To boot anything else.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yes.
It was a long time ago now.
Yes.
So that was the first, I learned programming on that. That was my first computer that I operated. And then my first computer that was mine, I think I got when I was in like freshman in high school. It was a 486 66 with 8 megs of RAM and a 425 megabyte hard drive. Probably 5,400 RPM or maybe even lower if they had lower back then. And that's where that was like the time of the IRC wars. So that's and other various mischief on the internet. So.
The good old days, as I like to call it. Which actually gets to the next question, which is, what programming language did you learn first? It sounded like it was BASIC, but were there any others? And of course, what are you writing in today?
Yeah, so first programming language I learned was BASIC on that Apple IIe when I was in 5th grade. I picked up QBasic in 8th grade when my dad brought home like a 486 33 laptop from work that had DOS 5.0 on it. Nice. And it had gorillas.bas, I think. It was in QBasic.
Yeah.
So I bought a book on QBasic and started learning how to write my own QBasic, like graphics, music, and stuff like that. Then after I started like TCL, because like I said, IRC war, so I was writing egg drop bots to like do channel takeovers and NIC collisions, like all that good stuff of the mid to late 90s. And then, what am I using now? So my favorite language to like throw stuff together on for hacking projects is usually Python. But I've really kind of become like a polyglot. Is that the word for like multilingual people?
Multi-language.
So I do a lot of CTFs where you typically have to sometimes modify code that's been provided by the CTF. So, I mean, like now I just program anything. I'll do Ruby, Python, Go, Java, C#, C++, C.
The Burp extension, what was that written in?
The Burp extension. So when you write a Burp extension, you have 3 choices. You can do Java, you can do Python, or you can do Ruby. But the problem with doing with Ruby and Python is you have to use like a translation engine.
I was going to say it's not native because it's Java that it's written in.
You're right. Burp Suite is written in Java. And if you use that translation engine, you run into memory allocation issues when you use extensions. So I did write the entire thing in Java to make it like fully compatible with Burp Suite so there wouldn't be any memory issues. Yeah. So when that's released, all that wonderful Java code will be up there. I'm not a big fan of Java myself, but like it's a use case. Like you have to write Java to write a really good extension for Burp Suite, so I wrote in Java. It's like once you know a lot of programming languages, there's not really any issue. You just like it's like architecture problems. Like, okay, in this language, how do I do a microservice or a web service? And you just got to look that up, like O'Reilly cookbook for X language.
Like in Python, how do I do Oh, wait. Never mind.
Right. Yeah.
Damn it.
I know where you're going with that.
It's like syntactical sugar. It's effectively, okay, how do I do a loop in this language? Where do I put the braces? Where do I put the variables? Like, it's all the same concepts. It's just the way that you write it is just very slightly different.
Exactly. Yeah. So my go-to languages would be Python, and then probably C#. I'm like a C++, C#, C# are like my wheelhouse, really, in terms of like big applications where you're doing complex stuff, because I know them really well. So I'd probably go for C# after Python. But Python is awesome for quick. There's libraries for everything. So
to quote one of my old professors, Phil Hatcher, C is for the brave, and I am also a C fanatic. So,
yeah, so I love C and C++ programming. You know, I used to interview people for software engineering when I was on our software team, and one of my pet peeves was memory leaks. Right, so we had a ton of legacy C++ code, and when I first was brought on board onto the software team, because I was originally hired to be a hardware engineer, but the software guy quit on like week 2, so I quickly became the software guy because they were like, "Oh, you know everything. Brent can do anything." So I jumped in there. But where's I going with this? Right, so interviewing people. So when I was first brought on the software project, there was a ton of memory leaks. Like, you'd leave that web application running for a day, and the memory consumption would go from like 10 megabytes to like 200 megabytes, and then it would just keep going. And I was like, obviously there's a memory leak. So I went through like 25,000 lines of code, found every single memory leak, and fixed it. Right, so now it was stable. You could leave that thing running for 2 months. Memory consumption was like hovering right around like 12 megabytes. And then as we brought new people on, memory leaks started to creep in. So I started interviewing people, like specifically memory leak. Here's some code. Where's the problem? And I put some simple problems in there, and they would see that. But if they found the memory leak, I was like, we need to hire that person.
There you go. That's a good little tip as well for those that are, you know, in our position that are now hiring folks. By the way, my next question that I meant to get back to, or circling back to it, as you were writing code, VI, Vim, or Emacs?
So I'm old school. I VI all the way.
There you go.
I knew that already. I already knew what his answer was going to be.
Yeah, I think that stemmed from that may have stemmed from Slackware. I think like Slackware in the late 90s, earlier 2000s, it didn't come with Emacs by default, but it came with VI, I think. I'm not like 100% sure on this.
VI is part of the POSIX standard, so it's actually on pretty much every Linux distro by default.
Yeah. So like I installed it. I had VI. I didn't have Emacs. Okay, I'm going to use VI and figure out how to edit this. And yeah, the first time you got to look stuff up, because like how that's a joke. How do you exit VI, right?
Right. Yeah, and that was my experience with Solaris too. There was no other edit to get the system initially going and install anything else. You had to edit stuff with VI.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. Back out in the, I don't know, what do you call the other room in the studio?
The lounge.
The lounge. Out in the lounge, we were just talking about Solaris. I was like, Solaris was my wheelhouse in the late 90s and early 2000s in terms of like mischievous stuff.
Mischievous, yes. There was a lot of mischief to be had with Solaris.
Yeah, we were just talking about Solaris. So yeah, I love Solaris, and I've
interviewed a few people that I'm like, it sounds like it was my Solaris box you hacked into back in the day. Like, hold on, wait a minute. I saw people doing that, hacking into my Solaris boxes.
That might have been you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I would never do anything destructive. It was all I just needed high-speed storage.
Right. Yeah, that's mostly why people would break it. When I worked at the university in 2001.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, Keith, you're still here?
When you were breaking into Paul's university Solaris boxes and writing down notes, were you leaving them with spaces or tabs?
Oh, wow. You're going there. Okay, so actually, I have my text editor set up so that a tab equals 4 spaces. So I'm a space person, but I like to use the shortcut of the tab to tab over 4, so like everything gets aligned properly, but they're all spaces.
Smart,
and not
less typing.
Yeah.
So you and I are in the same kind of middle ground, right? It's spaces or tabs as 4 spaces.
Yes.
Like, that's just the way to do it.
I like it too.
Right. Last question for you, though, is what sort of advice would you give to newcomers in the industry?
Oh, newcomer. So industry, you mean information security?
Yes. Well, or hacking. Heck, why not, right?
Or hacking. Yeah. So my advice would be, first of all, learn as much as you can about like a diverse number of topics, right? Like, don't just to start. Don't just focus on web application, binary reversing, hardware hacking, lock picking, like whatever niche or niche I always say niche. I think that's how I was raised, but I think it's actually niche. I've learned recently. Whatever like you're thinking about, like try to experiment a little bit with all of them, especially if you can get yourself into like an entry-level CTF. Even like Seesaw, which is really targeted towards high school students. But don't let that stop you from, even if you're like 50, 60, 70 years old, don't let the fact that it's targeted towards high school students keep you away from that CTF, because there's a lot of basic concepts in hacking information security that you can experiment with and learn from that CTF. And it kind of gives you a broader picture of, oh, okay, what is really interesting to me, or what am I good at? What am I not good at? What do I want to learn about? You know, like for me, one thing I know I'm really bad at is cryptography. Like, yeah, sure, I know all the base concepts. I can TLS and AES all day. But like when you start talking about like, okay, Oracle attacks, I understand. But once you start getting more advanced in that, it goes over my head. And I've been trying to learn. My friend Nullsafer recently gave a workshop at Source this year that I attended, and like I hung in there for about half of the talk, and then the second half of the talk was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like I gotta sit down and understand all the math behind this before I can really understand what you're talking about. And that's like, for me, that's something I want to learn more about. So keep learning, experiment with a lot of different topics. That would be my advice. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it does. And my side comment is Matt is a wicked sharp dude. So maybe we'll have him on the show in the near future.
Oh my God, yeah.
But with that, we're going to take a short break and then come back with the news. Stay tuned.
Okay.